Today, I want to talk about a concept which I think maybe stresses out a lot of improvisers when they're learning how to improvise and they're learning about, what should I do, what should I not do. So when I was learning, and I don't even know if this is still like taught anymore, but um, at some point, multiple times, I was introduced to this concept which was referred to as an avoid note. An avoid note. It's, the idea is it's a note that you want to avoid. So in a major scale, in a major key, if you're playing, a major scale, the so-called avoid note would be the fourth, because that's the one note that's not really a proper extension of the chord. You can play the 13, you can play the 9, those all sound really nice. But if you want to play an 11, you want to play a sharp 11, not a. At least that's the idea. So, how do I feel about this? I don't think you should avoid it. I think that's a bad term. Like I said, I'm not sure if they still even use that term anymore. I don't think there's any note that you should just flat out avoid. But you should be aware that it's an unresolved note. So, what does that mean for you when you're practicing? Should you avoid the note? Absolutely not. Pretend that no one ever called it that. But you should be aware that it's an unresolved note. You might even like it and you might want to play it a lot. But you should, when you play it, you should know that it's unresolved, and you should know that if you want to, like, say for example, end a phrase on that note, then it sounds like an unanswered question. So, or you resolve it to the 3 after you play it, and you might really like that. You might want to do it a lot. So, but like for example, if you're playing a certain pattern, just don't avoid it at all. Just treat it like any other note. And when you're playing scales, when you're learning to play scales, and you're playing patterns, you're playing chromatics, you're doing whatever it is you want to do. Honestly, you really just don't need to worry about it too much. But you should be aware of it. So maybe call it like a careful note instead of an avoid note or something like that, because you don't want to avoid it, but you do want to be careful of it, and you do need to be aware that it's different than the other notes in the scale. So be conscious of that. And in a minor key, if you're playing a minor scale, it's that sixth note. Don't avoid it. It's a nice note, but it's the most unresolved note in the scale by far. So just be aware of that. Honestly, my 2 cents, if we're talking about like a dominant 7 chord, the same concept applies. The note that you want to be careful of is the fourth. And I've heard like really great solos by, like, especially a lot of early improvisers like Lester Young, Wes Montgomery, and they are not avoiding that note at all. That's like, so like, especially on a dominant 7 chord, it's supposed to be a not fully consonant chord. So maybe even worry about it even less on a dominant 7 chord. So that's my 2 cents. When you're coming across these terms, and when people tell you certain rules, you should always be aware that professional improvisers break those rules all the time. The rules are meant to be an approximation of how people play, not the other way around. So, any rule that someone tells you, you should take with a grain of salt. And especially if anyone tells you not to play the fourth note of a major quality chord, of course you can play it, but you should be aware of that note. Be aware of how it sounds. Be aware of the context of that note in the key. And really with any note, you want to know like that the third has a certain sound over a major 7 chord. You want to know what that note's going to sound like before you play it. But with the fourth especially, you should be aware of that note and just be careful of it. Maybe think of it as a careful note. But that's my 2 cents. Use your ear. Use your ear and use your taste and play it how you like, how you want. But certainly don't avoid it. That's a really silly uh, thing that people say.